When you look at the world of mergers of Wall Street listed firms like Allergrand, Callaway Golf, Pacific Mutual Life, PIMCO, and Pacific Care, to mention just a few, the name of Walter L. Schindler, the chairman and CEO of Sale Capital Partners, LLC, rises as one of the architects of these successes. Mr. Schindler, a Fulbright scholar and a former partner with the prestigious law firm of Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, was the lead advisor in over 60 successful mergers, acquisitions, and IPOs, and credits the Prometheus process to many of the successes. I had the pleasure of interviewing Walter, who shared his first exposure to Colonel John Warden, author of Winning in Fast Time and the creator of the Prometheus process.
I was involved in a very advanced buyout of a company, and the CEO, I was a member of the board, the CEO hired a consultant, and we had no idea who it was. And he had been the managing partner of Deloitte & Touche. And so we all were wondering, oh my God, who's this consultant going to be? And we had a mental image of the consultant as, we thought a guy was going to come in who was kind of like a McKinsey sort of consultant who was going to, sort of regurgitate platitudes about business behavior and so forth. And in comes John Warden, and we saw his bio and we said, wow, we weren't expecting this. So before we hired him, he went around the office and met all the people in the office. So I spent some time with him and I immediately liked him. So I thought, wow, this is interesting. We're hiring a consultant who was a colonel in the Air Force who created the Desert Storm campaign. Wow, this is brilliant. And he talked to us about winning in fast time. I'd never heard any of this before from anyone. And I always thought, consultants were sort of vague people who repackaged platitudes. And everything that John Warden told me was new and different and innovative. And even scarier, it actually made sense. Immediately, I kept thinking, I wonder why I never thought of it. So we hired John, and I attended the first of what became many. I put myself through his course several times.
It's really been interesting to work with Walter over the years, because he's been involved in so many fascinating companies and projects. I've not only enjoyed that association, but have been pleased to be able to confirm that the Prometheus process was useful in so many different companies and situations.
Well, I was fascinated with the success of Desert Storm, and then after John left the military, as he went into consulting, and his very, very first client was Texas Instruments, which at the time was on the verge of death.
I've worked with a lot of very, very talented people, but I can't think of anyone who could match Walter's intellectual background, from Italian classics to Yale doctorate to Harvard Law. His questions, his uptake were impressive, as was his knowledge of the history that's part of the Prometheus process. It's really fun to work with smart people.
I have read books on strategy. I've read many, articles in the McKinsey journals and so forth. I've never read anything on the subject of strategy better than this. And I did go to Harvard Law School, and I studied strategy at the business school. And I did not find anything that could compare with John's theories. And what's important, of course, is that his theories actually work. And they've been proven many, many times in many contexts.
People seem to learn well and quickly from stories and analogies. Their learning and their enjoyment is better when the illustrations are from a variety of areas, not just their particular specialties. So we use stories from the business world, from Desert Storm, and from the classics as well.
When he showed me the photos of the open planning room in the basement of the Pentagon, then I realized it made sense because it accelerated the time in which a strategic plan could be developed. If a strategic plan is created in segments, in different rooms, by different groups, then you have a tremendous slowness in the development of the plan. But if everyone's in an open environment, you have a rapid progress.
You would think that open planning with a lot of people involved would slow down the planning process, but it actually works in just the opposite way. Almost always, somebody knows the answers to questions, and you get multiple viewpoints up front rather than downstream when you've already started on a particular course. So not only do you move faster, you also have an agreed and understood plan when you are finished. I've seen this from military to academia to business. Open planning simply works.
The centers of gravity were a new idea to me. It intuitively made sense to me immediately. The thing that made the most sense immediately were two things. One, that you have to attack the leadership in the center of the target. And that seemed obvious as soon as I heard of it. I hadn't thought of it before, but it seemed obvious once I heard that. The other thing that seemed clear is that the least important circle was the fielded forces, which is what is in everybody's mind as the image of war. And when we watch the movies, whether it's Saving Private Ryan or some other war movie, where it's always about the battlefield where the soldiers are out in the trenches, and yet that turns out to be the least impactful thing that can be done.
The world is really complex, and you simply can't deal with it without breaking it down into manageable parts. But if you break things down wrong, you end up with all kinds of issues. In the Prometheus process, we use my 5 rings method, which puts the most decisive things in the middle, like leadership, then arranges the rest in descending order of the return you get when you operate against them. The process works for military problems, markets, and for companies themselves. It really simplifies planning, and it makes sure you put your scarce resources against the right things, the centers of gravity.
The average venture capitalist is so overwhelmed by the promise of what they're seeing right in front of them that they just sort of assume that there's going to be a great exit. But they haven't mapped it out. And one of the things that John Warden does that is very, very instructive is he picks 5 years out as the exit point. You can pick any exit point you want. You can pick 3 years, you can pick 7 years. But forcing a team to draw a 5-year exit on the wall, and then working backwards to how are you going to get to that point, causes much more solid thinking. Are you going to be an IPO? Are you going to be a strategic acquisition? Who were the targets? Usually people put that off. People just like focusing on what's in front of them. So John Warden's theories have a very beneficial effect of forcing people to actually focus on the specific means of success.
We call this a future back approach. We always start with the future we intend to create, and we always give it a time frame. If there's no time frame, there is no strategy. Now, the user can choose the time frame, but it needs to be long enough to make strategic change and not so long as to be meaningless to people in the organization. 3 to 5 years seems to work well, although some of our clients have gone for slightly shorter time frames and some for longer.
The thing that was dramatic and counterintuitive at the same time is that John starts every strategic thinking session with a blank whiteboard. And then you wind up staring at this blank whiteboard, and then John forces the team to articulate what is this future picture going to look like? And so the future picture gets created without people thinking about how they're going to get there. The first step is, where are you trying to go? Are you trying to get to the bottom of the ocean? You trying to get to Jupiter? Or are you trying to just cross over to the Philippines? What are you doing exactly? And by forcing you to think through what's going to happen in 5 years, it then gets you focused, once you have the picture, on how exactly you're going to get there, as opposed to, I'm just going to work hard and do my best and somehow succeed at something or other. So there is, I find most, when I read strategic articles today, I find them vague after having studied Warden's teachings. I find that once you have gone through, as I have with several times with Warden's classes, it teaches you that you do have to become specific and concrete about how you're going to get from here to the future picture. And you have to show how you're going to do it in a way that's logical. And most people want to avoid that because almost anything you do or say can be criticized. So Warden teaches you to overcome the fear of being wrong. As he says many times, good enough plans violently executed lead to success. That's something that's hard for our current culture to grasp, because the current culture is sort of numbed by the overwhelming information that's available at our fingertips and mobile devices and computers and laptops and so forth. And all that information has a tendency to numb people into thinking, well, we better think this over some more. We better put this through our process a little bit, one more time. So what I've found is that the advent of greater technology, which has so much promise for faster execution, actually has the opposite effect of slowing down execution, because it gives people way too much data to think about and to absorb. And that's why we're seeing the rise of artificial intelligence, because everyone's hoping that some algorithm's going to think it through for them.
At a tactical level, there are a very, very large number of things you have to consider, and an impossible number of permutations and combinations. At a strategic level, though, there aren't so many things to consider. The Prometheus process makes it much easier to work through all the clutter that modernity has added onto what has always been there.
Had I not taken the Prometheus strategy course, I would not feel as confident in my strategic thinking, and I would not have ever developed a unified theory of what strategy is all about.
And those were just a few snippets from our interview with Walter Schindler. To get the rest of the story on what the Prometheus process can do for your organization, the next step would be to schedule a 30-minute briefing where they can unpack your firm's issues and begin to clarify your future vision.